Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a forum for all things public information related for police, fire, EMS, and local government. A place to grow and develop your public information skills. I am your host, Robert Tornaveni. I have over 11 years of experience as a PIO and 27 years as a law enforcement officer. I am proud to announce that we have partnered with the PIO Toolkit to expand and grow the podcast. Thank you to Christine Townsend and Law Publications for this amazing opportunity. To contact the show, email robert@piotoolkit.com. We need your feedback on how we're doing. Please rate us on whatever platform you listen or send us a review via email. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episodes. Thank you for listening. Sit back and enjoy the next episode. Good afternoon. Today on the PIO podcast, we have Associate Professor Amanda Hughes from Brigham Young University. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, Amanda, tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how emergency communications is your field.
Yeah, so many years ago when I started doing my PhD work, I started working in the space of looking at how social media was a new thing at the time. It was probably around 2006, 2007, and just how it was affecting the emergency management community. And one of the things that I started doing was working with public information officers, because we found that they were one of the most affected by the changes in social media and having to adapt to social media as a new way to communicate with the public, and also having to monitor it and then having no idea how to do that. And so there was just a lot of interesting problems in that space. And I found the public information officers were just such a wonderful community to work with. They were so inviting and happy and eager to kind of work with me to hear more about their problems, but also to help them hopefully try to make more sense of how to use social media. So I really love PIOs and I always enjoy working with them.
Excellent. A little bit more background. You do a lot of research, and one of the things that I came through is I ended up finding your publications page where you put out a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to kind of lean in that way, and then we'll go from there about the questions. But I saw that one of your articles that you wrote, which was titled "When Official Systems Overload: A Framework for Finding Social Media Calls for Help During Evacuation." And in there, it stated the challenge is that as citizens turn to social media to request evacuation help, official emergency response organizations have limited knowledge or experience in information processing in this new media environment. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, totally. So I actually first noticed this phenomena in Hurricane Sandy, which was like 2012. And there was a flooded community, and they weren't able to get through to 911 because everything was just overloaded, because it was in the New York area, a very heavily populated area. And so they started sending out messages for calls for help, saying that, I have a grandmother and she's stuck in the second floor of her house, or things like that. And they were posting it on social media. And at first, everyone was like, don't post this on social media. We can't handle this on social media. But they said, but we have nowhere else to post it because we can't get through to 911. And so they kind of, one of the dispatchers at their, I don't remember exactly where, but started recognizing that this was a need, that they couldn't just ignore this. They had to figure out, okay, well, if there are people sending messages over social media, we need to figure out how we can find them and do something with them. So they were kind of passing them on through their to dispatch, kind of behind the scenes, some of these requests for help through social media. And then we saw it's happened many times since in different communities. And so the paper that you were talking about specifically was about it was Hurricane Harvey, and how the same thing happened. The system was just overloaded. They couldn't get through calls to the typical 911 dispatchers. And so people were sending out messages for help on social media. But most emergency management organizations are not equipped to know how to get that information, to extract it, especially when a big event happens and you're busy and you're doing other things. And just depending on the area, if you may be getting like millions of messages over social media, and having to sort through those to find the ones that have people actually asking for help is a really difficult task.
I completely understand that, having been on the agency side of something when a disaster occurs and you're trying to field everything at one time. It is very difficult. That article was written like 5 years ago. Are the agencies better prepared now, or have they really not even scratched the surface yet?
I it actually came out in 2019, so it's not quite 5 years, but I don't think we've made a huge amount of strides in that time period. I think that from my experience talking with a lot of different kinds of PIOs in different communities, so there's a big difference between like a rural community where they don't have the funding and people are PIO is just one hat of many hats that somebody is wearing, versus some of the bigger jurisdictions where they actually have quite a bit of funding to buy nice tools, and they may have three or four or even a whole team of people that work just on social media. But a lot of places don't have that kind of luxury. So certainly those types of places are usually a bit more advanced in how they can handle social media. But I mean, unfortunately, disasters strike everywhere, whether you're in a urban community or a rural community. So yeah, they all have to figure out how to make it work.
And I know some platforms like Facebook, a lot of times when there's disasters in the area, they've created the ability for the person to say that they're okay.
Hmm.
So somebody can log in and see that they're all right, but it's not really there's no real setup platform for people to distribute information to emergency management any way, shape, or form, to say here's the help you need. I know there is a platform that Twitter was working on that was going to be designed to the agencies were going to get messaging, the ability to message, but that never kind of came out. And I have never seen it really move beyond, some of the very large agencies like New York or Chicago. It's not gotten
Hmm.
smaller or platform had moved down. And I know there's a host of software out there, but again, that goes to budget constraints as well.
Yeah.
What did you see in regards to people messaging? Was it just that they didn't have the time to listen, or was it that they weren't listening at all? They hadn't even looked at their social media.
Um, well, I mean, you see all kinds of different things, and certainly it depends on what the type of event is and the severity and how much people are lacking in information. But I mean, you'll see there's kind of different channels, and so there's a lot of channels where members of the public will just communicate kind of amongst themselves and kind of problem solve, and figure out how to solve some of the things. Maybe they figure out places where they can donate or help people. Or but then there's also kind of these venues where people will try to communicate with emergency managers, and often those will be like kind of well defined places, like like a agency might have a Facebook page or a Twitter account or something like that, where they can readily receive that information. But there's a big discrepancy between different agencies and how responsive those agencies are to those types of communications. And then that kind of builds or doesn't build a relationship with that community. So I've seen many communities where they are very involved in kind of emergency management, and like the emergency agency engages with the public in really meaningful ways, and kind of values their feedback, and might gather information, even like pictures or information about like what does the flooding look like where you live, or things like that, that they can then kind of get accurate information of how things are unfolding. But then I think there's also lots of places where people just don't have the time, or many other types of reasons, and they don't really engage with the public, and so then the public doesn't really engage with them. So it there's a wide variety, I think, across the country, depending on the different jurisdictions, and just the skills and the interest of the people who are um, in those positions to be able to communicate with the public. So
Does that have to do with like filtering criteria?
um so yeah, so a lot of the work that I do, some of this, and then I have lots of colleagues that are trying to figure out how can we extract useful information from social media. Because when a large event happens, you could get hundreds of millions of messages through things like Twitter or even Facebook, and it's just impossible for a single person to look through. And most of it is not super helpful, or sometimes even relevant. So I mean, there's a lot of things that you see in any sort of event of people just kind of generally talking about the event, or wishing well wishes or prayers, and kind of that type of thing as well. But usually those aren't the things that the emergency responders care about. They want to know about, actionable information that tells them something about, the status of the event, or where people might need help or assistance. And that kind of information is a lot, is kind of buried in there. So it's kind of like a needle in a haystack. So there is a lot of work in like machine learning and natural language processing. I do a little bit of it, but a lot of that work is trying to figure out, are there automated ways that we can kind of pull out the information that's most helpful for people, that we can actually do something with. And we still have a long way to go, but the tools are getting better, and they're still working on it. It's still a very open-ended problem.
I can see it is. And looking at what's going on right now in Ukraine and seeing how social media has played a very big role in things going on there, and learning there's intelligence information that's coming in and out of there, and emergency information coming in and out of there. It's amazing how social media has become such an emergency management tool, or a general crisis tool for a
Mhm,
lot of communities worldwide,
mhm.
and we still don't have a firm grasp on what to do with it to make it. That's the funny thing
Yeah.
on my part. You look at it and go, why don't we have anything? But I think we want to post more things about cats and dogs, and TikToks about food and that type of stuff. All right, so I wanted to ask you another question. And I think this is kind of relevant to what's going on in with natural disasters and stuff. Is you wrote another article with some colleagues called "Communicating Crisis with Persuasion: Examining the Official Twitter Messages and Heat Hazards." And like I said, it's kind of relevant to dealing with extreme weather. You're quoted as saying, however, little research attention has been paid to probing the content of crisis message for its potential contribution to persuasion, especially when those messages are sent through social media. So why is developing a message that is persuasive critical during these types of disasters? And what are the term and why do you use the term persuasive message factors?
Yeah. So I suspect nobody would argue that it is a big problem trying to get people to conform to emergency messaging, where you tell people you should be doing this, you should be evacuating, and then trying to get them to actually do it is a hard thing. And if we could solve that, that would be amazing. And there's so many reasons why people don't listen to that type of messaging. But one of the things that we kind of were trying to attack with this paper is that we were trying to look at what, at least in from a theoretical standpoint, what are the types of things that tend to persuade people to listen, or to hear a message, and potentially conform to the things that you're trying to help them understand, or trying to help them do. And So a lot of this was kind of more theory driven. It's actually really difficult to do studies where you can test whether people actually listened, because it's just difficult to do, because
How to
to
evaluate
actually
it.
like, yeah, to get to, to like get, send out a message and then like go to like thousands and hundreds of thousands of people and say, what did you actually do? It's like very time consuming and very
Right.
expensive. And so there aren't a lot of studies that do that. So this study is a bit more theoretical, but some of the things that we looked at is we were looking at heat hazards. So this was like extreme heat. So like, in the summer when it gets over 100 degrees Fahrenheit and for long sustained periods and it's really hot, and there's real risk to people, being outside, either doing like recreational activities, or there's also higher risk to like the elderly and other people that don't have means of like air conditioning or things too. So what we did is we looked at a bunch of different uh, Twitter, and I think we looked at some Facebook too, messages from different national weather forecast offices across the country. And we just kind of looked at the different types of messages that they were sending. And then we looked at how frequently those messages were like rebroadcast. So usually that's a sign that you've read something and that you're trying to share it with others. If you retweet, like for Twitter, which is where you're just taking the message and kind of sending it out to your own community. So we were looking at like what kinds of messages were more frequently retweeted. And so some of the things we were looking at was like some of the persuasive message factors were things like, did they talk about the impact that this heat would have on the health of people? Because sometimes people just don't understand, like, how is that actually going to impact me? And so that's like a way to kind of help people understand the severity of the event. We also looked at the hazard intensity. So that's like, how hot is it? So there's a big difference between it being like 99 degrees and like 115 degrees. And people tend to have kind of like, a mental kind of image or like understanding in their mind of like, if it's 115 degrees, there's a lot of activities that I just would not do in that heat. And so that's important information to make sure that people understand. What else? I wrote down some notes because that paper was from a little while ago, and I don't always have things fresh in my mind.
I
Um,
understand. It just caught my mind because I think it's interesting because as a PIO, messaging and clarity of messaging is extremely important. And I think this is a value to the listeners about this.
yeah, and I think I've been reading a lot. I've been doing a lot of recent stuff, just trying to understand how can we make more effective messaging, especially for social media, because it's a very different venue.
Yes.
It's kind of this short messaging, and you can't, I mean, in many cases you can send them tons of information to read, but they're not going to do it if it's not in short little sound bites, right? So
Right.
it's really kind of a skill, I think, that everybody's having to develop, to how can we get the most critical information into these short sound bites that will make sense to people and motivate them to actually act on them. um, so those were some of the things that we were looking at, but there's also other people that have been doing research in this area too, and these kind of similar things is like relating that, the showing people how severe something is and helping them understand the impact that it could have on them personally, as opposed to kind of this abstract, oh, it's really hot out there, be careful. But like, instead of doing things like that, saying things like, if you're going for a run, make sure that you protect yourself in different ways, and you bring you water and stuff like that. And those can sometimes relate a little, like get through a little bit more, because they're a little more specific to somebody who's actually doing one of those activities out in the heat. So
Right. All right. So I wanted to cover one more article. And again, and this is I think again goes right towards what public information officers would love to be able to do is the article was titled Designing an Application for Social Media Needs in Emergency Public Information Work. And it was about creating a software application that it could meet the needs of public information officers. And I'm curious, where is that at this point?
This is one of the problems with doing research is that that was work that I did for my PhD, which was almost 10 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
And I know it feels like forever ago, but not so in many ways too. But I did develop it a little more, but unfortunately I just didn't have the resources as a researcher to like support like full development of the tool.
Okay.
Um, so unfortunately, it's not like something that you can download or anything. I haven't worked on it for a very long time. I just, but I do have other colleagues that are working on some tools. There's one called Citizen Helper that I've been helping a lot with, that is trying to extract information from social media. And some of the projects we've been working on actually that I'm pretty excited about is that we've been trying to figure out ways that we can get volunteers, like mostly from CERT teams, to help in doing some of the work to help with the machine learning stuff. Because I don't know how much you know about machine learning, but with machine learning, there's these people are always talking about algorithms and things for extracting information from data. But to be able to extract information from data, you have to have a bunch of data that has been labeled so that that machine can learn from it.
Mhm.
So what that means is that we often have to have people look at social media messages and say, that is good information. That is information that would help me understand damage. And this one contains information that would help me understand somebody that was calling for help, for example. And so we have to have tons of data that is labeled according to what kind of information is in it. So then we can give it to the machine and they can run like their algorithms on it to learn from that. But unfortunately, it takes a lot of time and effort to label that data and have people look at it. And
Incredibly time consuming. Yeah.
yeah, and so we've been exploring ways of being able to do that on a more on a larger scale than what we've been able to do kind of in our research labs. And
Right.
we've also noticed that a big part of being able to label data well is knowing the local area where that's being affected.
Mm,
So
okay.
like understanding like what when people talk about, you know, a local landmark being flooded or this street is not passable, like that doesn't mean anything to somebody that doesn't live there.
Right.
So
Right.
but it does mean a lot to the people that live there. So we've been trying to kind of figure out, could we get like local CERT teams across the country to help out when so like in Houston, for example, they get a lot of flooding from hurricanes and stuff. So could we work with a local CERT team there to kind of help us label data to be able to quickly get our machine learning algorithms up and running so that they could extract data
And
more
that's interesting
quickly?
because there's a public information officer in the emergency management field in St. Louis, Sarah Russell, and she's part of their social media unit. And one of the things that they do is they when a disaster happens, she may end up going to the location, or she may not. She might be 500-600 miles away from it, but filtering social media or posting social media things based on the need of the disaster that she's working with.
Yes.
And
Um, yeah.
I think the problem that happens though with that, and I'll let you go ahead and you answer your part and go ahead.
Oh, no, I just was gonna say that I have worked with sometimes they're called virtual operation support teams.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So I've actually been on some of the early ones. A lot of them kind of initially I did my graduate work in Colorado. So I lived in like the Denver area for like 12 years and there was a bunch of people kind of in that area that did some of the initial kind of VOST operations. And so I was part of that back when I had more time before I became a professor. But I really admire that work, and I've always been trying to support that too. So
Let me ask you this. Do you think that agencies would benefit from from having a virtual operations group like that? Because I think and where I was going with this before was, I think a lot of times the fear that some of the municipalities have is that they're giving up control. And
Yeah.
every municipality, regardless of how big or small they are, they're like fiefdoms, and nobody wants to give up control of something. But in a disaster, when there's data that's coming in and you can't manage it because you're managing the disaster on the ground right then and there, how do we convince municipalities maybe to look at that's not a bad idea, because you have people across the country that would want to help and they can't leave their home, but they can certainly look on a computer and filter data.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that's something we've been looking into a lot and trying to understand what those tensions are that keep people from wanting to be able to do that. And I will say, I think it's gotten a lot better. I think over time, people have been more accepting of the idea that they don't know that social media is something important. Like, so for a while, it was like, what is social media and why is this even like relevant? So I feel like that conversation is mostly um, people, I think most people agree that like there's some value in social media, whether they think it has as much value as others, that's fine. They may not agree, but I think the um, I think it just takes time, right? And also I think it's really important with those VOS types of organizations is building that trust with that organization um, before something happens,
Right.
because it's almost impossible to just like pivot in the middle of a disaster unless you have to, right?
Right.
To bring in a whole new organization that you don't really know very well and that you're not sure if they're going to do what is needed and if they're going to do a great job. And I totally understand like that trust issue. I think a lot of the ones I have seen that have been successful at doing some VOS work is because they've been trying it out for a long time and kind of established a relationship. And then the next time something happened, they already knew, hey, you guys are great. You helped us last time. You know, come on, come on, come along and help us out again.
Now, let me ask you this: since you've been doing this, since the forest fires have been raging the last few years, have you seen a better coordination? Because it seems like social media definitely is a major factor in the getting the word out to the communities and the public in a whole during a forest fire. And since they've been so prevalent the last 3 or 4 years, and this year looks like it's not going to be any different.
Yeah, I know that's a really good question. I don't know that I've like specifically studied or looked at that, but I do think I think I've seen social media be more organized around those types of things, and I've seen it used a lot amongst the community just to kind of coordinate their own efforts, which I know sometimes makes emergency management a little nervous because they want to have more control over that. But I think in general, I think that's a good movement. It is kind of allowing people to help themselves
Well,
as well.
absolutely. I don't
Yeah.
I as an emergency management person, I have no problem if the public wants to help themselves, because that allows us to go deal with somebody that can't help themselves. So I think
Yeah.
that's great. So when the public bands together to solve their problems, I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I think the big issue that has come up in recent years is just, especially during COVID, it really came to the forefront of everybody's mind is that there's just so much room for people to misuse social media and
Hmm.
to share information that isn't all correct or
Right.
or is purposely misleading. And that's I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And if anything, I think it's just been getting worse lately. So
And
it's a hard, yeah.
I agree. And I hope that at some point there's a way to label it as misinformation quicker, and to remove those platforms. I mean, I know a lot of it are bots, I know
Yeah.
a lot of it is algorithms that are just creating chaos just to do it, or clickbait and so on. So it becomes, it's a money making venture. It's just like anything
Yeah.
for some of these platforms that are doing that. But when you can't win on those. All right, so let me
Yeah.
ask you a couple of freestyle questions here, or actually a rapid fire questions, and we'll lighten it up a little bit here. Your favorite activity to do when you're off?
I love playing board games with my husband and my family. But during COVID, we just started buying tons of board games, so we do that a lot.
Nice. Chocolate or vanilla?
I like vanilla.
Okay, a must-read book in your mind.
One I've kind of been revisiting because it's just so helpful. Atomic Habits by James Clear, I think is who the author is. Just great for like trying to like figure out how can I make some better habits in my life.
Oh, that's good. That's
Yeah.
an interesting. I'll have to look at that. If you could go back in time and give your 18-year-old self advice, what would it be?
Uh, Probably just to not worry so much. That everything's gonna be okay.
That's always good. Yeah, we need that. Favorite drink of choice?
Um, it's kind of funny in Utah, we have a lot of people that don't drink alcohol. So we have a lot of these soda places that
Hmm.
are so you get all kinds of fancy so my favorite is one called Bombshell, and it has it's like Mountain Dew with like grapefruit and pomegranate and fresh lime, and it tastes awesome.
Interesting. Okay, I'll have to check that out next time I'm out there. Excellent.
Yeah.
What would be your superpower if you could get one?
I mean, there's tons of things, but I think it would be pretty awesome to be able to fly. That'd be pretty cool.
I think everybody loves that one. Absolutely. All right. So, Amanda, your final thoughts, anything you'd like to add?
Um, no, I'm just excited to see where things are headed. I This has just been I love working with PIOs and understanding the challenges they have because they're dealing with so much, and I feel like social media kind of threw a wrench in like everything and made it a lot more difficult because I think it was much easier to kind of control the narrative of like what was happening during an event before social media and kind of all these ways that people can like take videos and kind of do their own reporting, and trying to figure out how to like make that work and still do your job is so difficult. And I know it's not going to resolve itself anytime soon. I have plenty of work to do for a long time.
Well, Amanda, how can people best reach out to you if they want to learn more about you or connect?
Yeah, so I have a research lab. It's called the Crisis Informatics Lab. I think it's just crisis.byu.edu, I think is my website. And then but you can also just Google my name, Amanda Hughes BYU, and it would come up. And I would love, if anybody wants to email me, it's Amanda_Hughes@byu.edu. I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime, really, especially if you're interested in this area. I'd love to talk.
And I will add that all into the show notes. So I'm sure somebody will connect with you because you've got some really interesting articles out there, and I could go on for hours, and unfortunately I geek out on all this stuff. So this is great. This is awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Amanda, thank you very much for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows reviews, please give us a review. We appreciate any review, good or bad. It helps us improve on each episode. Until next time, be safe.